I wanted to do a rewatch of a totally different Stargate episode, but I was pulling clips from Crystal Skull for my Milo Thatch video, and I realized that I have a surprising amount of things to say about this episode. Crystal Skull is the 21st episode of season 3. And it's another episode that begins with Daniel giving a work presentation where he's like, "Hey guys, I found this cool thing. Should we go check out this cool thing that I found? I hope that this cool thing doesn't have dire and unforeseen consequences."
Because I'm dead?
Surprise! The cool thing has dire and unforeseen consequences. Okay, technically the episode opens with the Malp exploring the alien cavern, and we get this classic Jack O'Neill exchange.
These are leptons.
Get out.
Normally, neutrinos pass right through ordinary matter, no matter how dense. I mean, something like 500 million billion just passed through you.
No matter how dense.
Which leads to an even more classic moment, which I want on a t-shirt, but they don't have any like this on Redbubble, and I'd have to design one.
If you'd been listening, you'd know that Nintendo's passed through everything. I heard.
I've said it before, and I will say it again. Richard Dean Anderson is a treasure.
Whomever the builders are, they would appear to be a formidable race.
You could fit every pyramid on Earth inside this thing and still have room to spare.
Yeah, can you imagine heating this place?
The object that they find in the large cavern is a crystal skull that is very similar to the crystal skull that Daniel's grandfather, Nicholas Ballard, found in Belize a number of years ago. 3 things right off the bat here. First, Daniel says,
The great explorer, the not-so-great grandfather Nicholas Ballard. He preferred being called Nick even when I was a kid.
And when I was a kid, my paternal grandmother had me call her by her first name, so I was unaware that this was weird. 2, the way Daniel says Belize bothers me.
Because it's exactly like the one found in 1971 in Belize. The skull that Nick discovered in Belize was unique.
The Lost Pyramids of Belize.
He is putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. It's Belize, not Belize. I've been to Belize on many occasions. Please accept this photo as proof. Once when I was there was a tapir named Scotty who became my mortal enemy. But humans live longer than tapirs, so he's dead now. And 3, crystal skulls are a real thing. And by that, I mean that they are an actual object that people claim to have found in these remote locations, but various studies have proved that they are a comparatively modern-day hoax. It's actually pretty interesting. But it's a neat little mythology tidbit for this episode. And we're also going to pretend that Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull doesn't exist. Okay, so Daniel stares into the eyes of the skull, radiation spikes, teal'c pulls the classic SG-1 maneuver of trying to shoot the alien thing in an attempt to turn it off, but it's too late. Daniel is now out of phase, and the rest of SG-1 flees. And yes, this is the first episode where somebody goes out of phase. Also, Daniel does not have good luck when it comes to radiation. They send teal'c back to the cavern without any protective gear to retrieve the crystal skull. And teal'c is concerned enough to proceed at a light jog. And maybe it's just me, but if I were in charge here, I would have at least put him in a hazmat suit or something. At this point, Daniel realizes that he is invisible, and he straight up chucks his backpack into the pit for some reason, and follows teal'c out of the cavern and back to the SGC. This episode is full of such magnificent O'Neill one-liners.
Napoleonic power monger.
Even Siler gets a moment.
What do you think? I think you're gonna get fired.
The team figures that Daniel's grandfather might have some insights about the crystal skull.
Nick?
But he is now in a facility because people think that he is nuts for claiming that the crystal skull he found took him to go see giant aliens. This episode has so many great scenes of just Daniel snarking by himself in a corner.
Oh, yes, by the way, he's insane.
And like, nobody can hear him, and even the one person who can hear him is pretending that they can't hear him.
It wasn't nonsense, I was right.
It's basically me in every single work meeting. Really, I think Daniel is the only main character on this show who could go out of phase and have it continue to work for storytelling purposes, because it's entirely realistic that Daniel would continue to just talk out loud and verbally process his thoughts even though nobody can hear him.
But if he really was transported to P7X377, maybe this guy was trying to send me somewhere, and something interrupted the process.
I get the feeling that Daniel's still around.
We have to go back there.
I enjoy the fact that when Daniel is out of phase, he's basically just like sitting on random things. There are some good teal'c moments in this episode too.
And if that thing zaps you to wherever it sent Dr. Jackson, then I will have succeeded in locating him. Dr. Fraser believes you are not strong enough to undertake such a mission.
Yeah, whatever.
Dr. Fraser is usually correct in such matters.
This episode is also funny because they bring up Daniel's theory about how aliens built the pyramid multiple times.
The academic community didn't believe your theory that the pyramids were landing sites for alien spaceships either.
He staked his entire academic career on his belief that the great pyramids of Egypt were made by aliens.
In the reality of Stargate, the aliens did. The Goa'uld built the pyramids as landing pads for their spaceships. However, in the Stargate movie, all Daniel Jackson says during his presentation is that he believes the pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty did not build the pyramids. And when someone in the audience asks him who he thought built the pyramids, he didn't know. And then someone kind of heckling him calls out, "Men from Mars?" And everybody laughs. But Daniel is not the one who said that aliens built the pyramids. That was not his theory. But somehow that became canon in the show universe. They bring Nick back to the SGC, which Hammond is not thrilled about. But Jack says that no one would believe stories about wormholes coming from a guy who has been in a mental health facility for decades for his assertions about giant aliens. And I think that Jack is probably correct.
Colonel, you walk a fine line. Thank you, sir.
So I've been mentioning the giant aliens thing throughout this video, but SG-1 does not find out that this is what Nick was necessarily saying, like right away. There is a scene where Nick explains to them that when the skull took him away, he met the giant aliens, and they're like, okay.
And then they came,
They?
the giants,
Giants.
the giant aliens.
Also, sidebar, this episode is referenced in the episode Wormhole Extreme in two ways. First, in that episode, Major Stacy Monroe's actress is reading her script and she notes that she is out of phase and she asks why she doesn't fall through the floor. And then also, they're talking about budget cuts and trying to figure out how, within the script, Colonel Danning can get past the giant aliens if he cannot fly. So that's just a fun little callback. Eventually, Sam goes home for the night, and this little moment is so sad.
What? Well, that's it? Whatever happened to working through the night? I'd do it for you.
Daniel goes to see Nick, and then they realize that Nick can see him, likely because he went through the same crystal skull radiation process that Daniel did.
You can see me?
Yes, Daniel, I can see you.
Why didn't you say something?
But Nick thought that he was just crazy and hallucinating. So together, the two of them are able to convince Jack and General Hammond that Daniel is still there.
I'm standing right beside you.
Standing right beside me.
He's lost a few pounds.
Jack, don't be an ass.
Jack, don't be an ass.
Daniel?
I'd also like to point out that Jack is very clearly still on base. He did not go home and did in fact continue to work through the night. I also love that Jack asks a question and Daniel gives like this kind of long form answer.
So it wasn't the skull alone that did this, it was its connection to the cavern?
Yes, I think the skull is just the icon that represents the human form.
Yes.
And Nick, as his interpreter, just says, yes. They determine that they have to go back to the planet and replace the crystal skull in the cavern and let the process essentially finish. And I think it's funny that they don't give Nick any sort of like military fatigues. They just send him through the gate in his suit and his ascot. He's just dressed all fancy. They put the skull back on the pedestal. Daniel looks into its eyes. There's pretty radiation. And suddenly, everyone except teal'c is out of phase. teal'c has a symbiote, so he does not get to be part of the cool kids skull club. The giant alien appears, and it's all like smoky and misty, and seems to make this weird sound effect if you listen closely. He remembers Nick, which is amazing.
You may remain.
Me?
Him?
This is not the first time you have journeyed here.
You remember?
He can recognize this guy who he saw once, briefly, 29 years ago. And I cannot remember the names or faces of people I worked with every single day, like 2 jobs ago. Nick decides to stay with the giant alien, and in saying goodbye, Daniel calls Nick Grandpa.
I am proud of you.
Goodbye, Grandpa.
Because somehow they managed to hash out all of their issues about Nick abandoning Daniel when he was orphaned as an 8-year-old. No therapy needed. And that's it. And I kind of wonder, does this come back again at any point? Like, do we ever check in with Nick? See how he's doing with these giant aliens? See if he learned anything? He's pretty old, so I feel like they kind of want to check in at some point, make sure he's still alive. And I feel like it really doesn't ever come back up again. But I also said that about Michello, and I was wrong. But I feel more confident about this, that I am correct, that we never again hear about Daniel's grandfather or these giant aliens. The idea of being out of phase does come back for sure. They use that multiple times in the future. And that's Crystal Skull. It's an episode with kind of a weird plot, but remember, I like weird. And it's also got a lot of really good little character moments and some memorable one-liners. Okay, 2 facts about Belize to close us out. First, Belize may not actually be a country anymore in a couple of years if Guatemala has their way in the international courts. And 2, Belize can be a very frustrating country if you are a naturally super curious person. Because if you drive around in some of the less populated regions, you'll see these random hills just like in the middle of fields. And it has been explained to me that these are not actually hills, like these are not natural structures. They're basically unexcavated ruins. Like there is stuff under there. And a lot of these are on private property, so you can't just go and dig them up or you will like definitely be shot. But the Belizean government just doesn't have enough money to go around and fund all of these archaeological digs. So these things are just out there in fields full of mysteries, and I always want to know what is in them, and I will probably never know. And I'm thinking specifically of these weird hills in a papaya field. It's just a mystery that will never be solved. An unsolved mystery, one might say. I should have worn my Belize t-shirt for this video, and I didn't. Missed opportunities for thematic ensemble.